Did The Simpsons predict Russia invading Ukraine? The Simpsons is one of the most successful TV shows in the history of the planet. They've grossed millions upon millions of dollars and have done things other shows could have only dreamed of. Video games, books, board games, theme parks, you name it, and The Simpsons have done it. This obviously goes hand in hand with the fact that they have 33 seasons under their belt. It's currently the longest running scripted American primetime television show, and it has 10 whole seasons on second place. The Simpsons has been running on TV longer than I've been alive, and there's no reason to believe it's gonna stop anytime soon. Having 33 seasons to their name and 717 episodes in total, they've covered a wide variety of stories. Being the zany, animated, satirical comedy that it is, they've touched on some things that are pretty unbelievable. Whether it be Homer having the mob shoot an adult film in his house to completely destroying Springfield with garbage, the Simpsons are always doing something insane and outlandish. Most of the time, these things remain in their hysterical animated fantasy land and never come to fruition in real life. However, there have been some instances where the crazy things that they do on TV actually play out in real life. Enter The Simpsons Predictions. If you look up The Simpsons Predictions on the internet, you will find a ton of articles detailing all the times The Simpsons have predicted something in the future. You see, being on for 33 whole seasons means that a lot of real time has passed, which then means that tons of the stuff that you've written about has the potential to be proven correct. Let's take a look at some of the most famous examples. How about in season 11, episode 17, when Lisa becomes president and says the line, "We inherited quite the budget crunch from President Trump." Season 11 of The Simpsons would have come out in 1999. Fast forward 15 years though, and look at what happens. How about in season 23, episode 22, when Lady Gaga comes to the cartoon and wears almost exactly what she would later wear at the Super Bowl halftime show? Or how about for a less conventional one, where in season 5, episode 19, the lunch lady puts a bunch of horse meat in the children's meals, and then many years later a scandal involving Taco Bell and some other food chains found the very same horse meat in their products. I could go on and on with other examples of The Simpsons predicting various things, but I think that you guys get the point. Either way, it's safe to say that The Simpsons aren't new to the whole prediction game. But with all that being said, did they predict Russia invading Ukraine? Well, before I fully answer that, let's just take a quick look at what's happening in Ukraine to see if anything The Simpsons have said would have matched up with that. Well, as we've talked about several times on this channel recently, Russia and Ukraine are currently not on the friendliest of terms. Taking a brief trip back in time to December 1st, 1991, Ukraine got its independence. It was on that date that the entire country held a vote, and a staggering 92.3% of Ukrainians voted to become their own independent nation. This was after a long history of being controlled by the Soviet Union, and prior to that being attacked and oppressed by not only the Russians but several other countries too. Something that gets forgotten far too much is that less than 100 years ago, back in the 1930s, a full-on was committed against the Ukrainian people by Joseph Stalin. He specifically starved those that lived there, with survivors saying that Russian soldiers would see them making a soup of water, leaves, and twigs and force them to dump it out. It's things like this that led to the overwhelming support of independence in 1991 by all the people living in Ukraine. Even though many of the Ukrainian people rejoiced at this vote, the Russians weren't too happy about it. Ever since Ukraine has become their own country, Russia has refused to acknowledge it and believes that they should be an extension of Russia. In their mind, Ukraine has so many people of Russian descent already that they should just be in Russia. Not to mention that their culture is very similar to the Russian culture because they were under Russian control for so long. Anyways, very simply, Russia wants Ukraine, but Ukraine doesn't want Russia. This is why in 2014, Russia forcibly annexed the Crimean Peninsula peninsula, an area of land that was particularly important to the Russians. Before 1954, it used to be part of Russia but was transferred over to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and then retained after they got their independence. This meant that tons of the people living there were initially Russian and Russia wanted them back. Heavy sanctions were enforced on the Russians, but it wasn't enough to deter them from this annexation or from potentially taking more. Fast forward to right now, and currently over 100,000 Russian troops are just chilling right by the Ukrainian border, looking like they could march in at any given moment. Putin has come out and said that they have no plans to invade, but actions speak louder than words, and moving that many troops to that spot doesn't seem like something someone would just do for fun. Anyways, this is the state of Russia and Ukraine right now, and it could get bad very soon. But back to our question at hand. Did The Simpsons predict Russia invading Ukraine? Well, kind of. Max Fisher for Fox writes, "The rapidly worsening tension between the United States and Russia, not to mention Russia's invasion and annexation of part of Ukraine, has got lots of people talking about a new Cold War. That's overstating things, but it's true that US-Russia relations are at the worst since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Russian foreign policy is at its most aggressive. Even Russia hawks did not foresee things getting quite so bad quite so quickly. But someone did. The writing staff at The Simpsons. An old episode, Simpson Tide, predicted the return of the Soviet Union and a new Cold War back in 1998 when Boris Yeltsin was president and relations were good. The show began with Simpsons patriarch Homer Simpson joining the Navy, ending up on a submarine that accidentally gets into a shooting match with a Russian sub and wandering into Russian waters in what is taken as an attempt to defect. He then goes on to say that Russia's ambassador to the United Nations reveals that the collapse of the Soviet Union was just a ruse. Obviously, this was just a joke about how improbable it would be for a Russian official to push a button and bring back the Soviet Union. And of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine does not mean that the Soviet Union is back. But there is a certain continuity between Russia today and during the Soviet Union, with its aggression in Eastern Europe and its anti-Western politics at home. So there you have it, folks. The Simpsons kind of predicted what is happening right now. I want to emphasize what Max Fisher wrote there about the Soviet Union as well. The Soviet Union isn't back, and an invasion of Ukraine doesn't mean that it's coming back or anything like that. But like he says, the Simpsons' prediction of Russian aggression towards Eastern Europe is certainly accurate. One thing that should be noted though is how the episode Simpson Tide ends. Nuclear war is anticipated and it looks as if everything's about to go to hell, but through some dumb luck, Homer manages to get out of it, and in the process, everything goes back to the way things were. So if we're putting our full faith into the Simpsons predictions, then we can at least take some comfort in the fact that they didn't predict a full-on World War III involving Russia. So that is a good thing. Granted, maybe taking the Simpsons predictions literally isn't the best idea either, because even if this predict would work in our favor, there are plenty of other ones that have been thrown out there through the years that definitely wouldn't.
Did The Simpsons predict Putin starting World War III? To be completely honest, I guess the short answer is no. The long answer is kind of, and here's how. Of course, the entire world has been watching the rapidly worsening tensions between Russia and Ukraine for weeks now. But really, this whole ordeal stems back way further. Since 2014, when Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, people have been talking about the potential of a new Cold War, and sometimes, in the worst of times, a potential Third World War erupting as a result of this now new impending invasion. US-Russia relations are the worst they've been since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Russian foreign policy is getting quite aggressive. Every day it seems as though there is more new news to be seen and heard in regards to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and most recently, the news has seen some sanctions being placed on Russia by other countries in an effort to get the situation to de-escalate. While things certainly are terrible, maybe they weren't really all that unpredictable. When we take a look back at the 1998 episode of The Simpsons titled Simpson Tide, which was the 19th episode of the 9th season, you'll see what I'm talking about. Warning, spoilers ahead. I mean, at this point you've had like 24 years to view it, so probably don't have to say spoilers. In the episode, Homer almost causes the entire nuclear power plant that he works at to go into meltdown because he put a donut into the reactor core to make it bigger. This, of course, ends up in him being fired by Mr. Burns. After he is fired from his job, he is at home and suddenly on the TV he notices that there is a recruitment advertisement which is looking to get some new people enlisted in the Naval Reserve. Homer decides that perhaps this should be his new career path and he goes forth and enlists, with Moe, Barney, and Apu following suit shortly after. All the while this is going on, Bart purchases an earring and Homer gets upset about it and confiscates it. After this, while in the midst of his naval service, Homer and the others are placed onto a nuclear submarine. They begin to participate in a military exercise, but of course, this is a Simpsons episode, and it's Homer Simpson here, so something is bound to go awry. Homer ends up accidentally having the captain of the submarine fired out of a torpedo tube, and then proceeds to pilot the ship into Russian waters. Of course, this is seen as an attempt to defect, which then goes on to create political division between the USA and Russia. This then somehow leads to the revelation that the Soviet Union in fact was never dissolved. In true Simpsons fashion, we see the Berlin Wall rise up from the ground, we see Soviet troops with weapons and tanks in the streets, and we even see Vladimir Lenin rise up from his Moscow tomb. It's definitely quite a macabre experience, even in a silly animated television show. From there, nuclear war is now being anticipated until the US Navy goes on to drop depth charges onto the submarine that Homer's in. These are meant to either destroy it or force it up to the surface, but what it does is cause a pinhole leak in the hull of the submarine. Remember when I said that thing about Bart and the earring and maybe you thought it was kind of weird and random that I included it? Well, there is of course a reason. Homer takes this confiscated earring he has and uses it to plug the leak, which of course saves the submarine. In the end, just because it feels like I should explain how the story ends after just telling you everything else that happened, the submarine surfaces and Homer is taken away to stand before the court-martial, but in the end, because the officers on the review committee have done a slew of awful things, they end up giving Homer the punishment of mild dishonorable discharge, and then Homer goes home and forgives Bart because, as it turns out, the earring saved his life. It's a wonderful, happy ending. So, you see what I mean? No. The Simpsons did not predict Putin starting World War III. Of course, there is the joke in there about how improbable it would be to bring back the Soviet Union, I mean with the literal push of a button. That is not to say that the imminent threat of Ukraine being invaded means that anyone is trying to bring the Soviet Union back, but what is important and what the episode did do is accurately capture the continuity or the similarities between Russia today and the Soviet Union. And with that, I mean its Eastern European aggression and anti-Western politics. It's interesting, however, when we look at the history of Russia, even before the Soviet Union, back to the Russian Empire of the 18th and 19th centuries. We see some of the same views or ideas and kind of how Russia views itself in comparison to the rest of the world. We've seen Russia go from a royal empire to a totalitarian communist union to the capitalist federal state we see today, and while these are all grand transformations, some things have truly remained consistent. I mean, just yesterday, Putin himself made an hour-long address in which he described Ukraine as an integral part of his country's history, and he described Eastern Ukraine as, quote, ancient Russian lands. And this is of course the exact opposite of what those in Ukraine are saying. The episode also represented something that was likely true at the time, and definitely continues to be true, and that is the tension between Russia and the US itself. Just lately, as the news spread that Russia ordered troops into rebel-held regions, Russia has said that the troops have not yet been deployed, but that they will be, quote, peacekeeping in the regions. The United States responded to this by explaining that they felt calling them peacekeepers was, quote, nonsense, and continued on to accuse Russia of creating a pretext for war. It seems almost as if everyone is just waiting for someone to strike first, and it truly is terrifying. The swift reaction to the rogue submarine in the episode, although trivial and silly because it's a Simpsons episode, definitely kind of reflects this in a way. Right now, the US, along with other Western powers, have rallied together to stand behind Ukraine and have begun promising some swift sanctions, some of which are already being enacted. It's truly troubling and terrifying to watch as this all unfolds. So I guess that was a long way of saying that no, the Simpsons did not predict Putin starting World War III, but what they might have done is just show how little has changed in the last 24 years.
Did The Simpsons predict the end of the world? It's impossible to say since the world is by no means over, but let's take a look at some of the messaging within Season 9, Episode 4 and see what we can find. In the 8th installment of Treehouse of Terror, Homer finds himself as the last human on Earth after a massive nuclear war. And there are some striking predictions in this episode that speak to today's events. But these predictions don't come from the nuclear war part. There are some other parallels that the creators allude to in this short episode that speak volumes to the current state of things in 2022. The most notable one is in the cold open, where there's a dig at censorship with a Fox executive appearing on screen laughing maniacally at the prospect of censoring the hell out of the coming episode. This is the most accurate prediction in this whole episode and something that could be interpreted as a form of doomsaying by the writers. Of course, nuclear bombs seem more threatening than censorship, but there still hasn't been a nuclear attack. And there has absolutely been an increase in censorship over the years. These days there seems to be an increase in popularity of a Machiavellian outlook on life, which causes people to mistrust one another and the systems in which we live. People seem to expect the worst out of others in the fear that any person among us could secretly hold dangerous beliefs. And it's not an unfounded suspicion. Over the last 10 or 15 years, the right-wing political alignment started to increase in severity to the point where a new group was named, the alt-right community. This group did and continues to adopt a real school of thought, and the scariest part about it is that it appears as though any one of us could hold these beliefs somewhere below the surface, or behind the guise of an anonymous online username. So back when this group was first being named, there was a justifiable cause for alarm. However, with such a complex and threatening issue like the alt-right movement, it has proven extremely difficult for people to decide on the best ways to combat it. What seems to be the best method has been to adopt this Machiavellian attitude and to be prepared to trust no one and hold everyone accountable. This method has had its huge benefits, arguably doing a great job at unveiling hateful groups and preserving love and inclusivity as a cornerstone of our society. However, it appears as though the downside to this has been that large groups and even companies have also adopted this fear. And maybe most importantly, a fear that they may not be doing their part to keep these troublesome, problematic voices down. In the case of broadcasting and media companies, advertisers have become very quick to migrate away from content they deem damaging to their brands. So for these companies, this moral dilemma of trying to suppress these evil ideas has also become compounded with capital interests. And it seems as though the result has been an overcorrection in the form of excessive and unnecessary censorship on certain words or topics of discussion. While on the surface it's hard to discount the benefit of suppressing dangerous language and discussion from the internet, there is a major mistake being made here. Freedom of speech is meant to allow those who choose to speak their minds to do so, regardless of their political or moral alignment. The idea is that the bad people will naturally be phased out and held accountable by the greater good of society, without needing to be silenced preemptively. And this isn't a new method. It's been tested and proven effective in human societies over a trial period of thousands of years. But the difficulty is that this system requires a lot of trust that it will run its course effectively. And coming back to the Machiavellian, untrusting attitude of the masses these days, that trust just isn't there. So companies and individuals seem to be taking the burden on themselves of quieting problematic people and voices, and the result seems to be an unhealthy level of censorship. Now back to The Simpsons, because that's what this video is about, right? This is a very clear and calculated point being made in the cold open of this episode, which speaks to a danger that may be going under the radar more than any nuclear warhead in 2022. And as for the part of the episode about nuclear war, there are some similarities there, but the comparisons to today aren't quite as stark as the censorship message. Firstly, we see Mayor Quimby refusing to apologize after making a racist remark about French people, followed by an enraged French president firing a neutron bomb at Springfield. The remark being something about frogs' legs is obviously hyperbolically ridiculous, but it does make the point that international conflicts are often caused by the human fears and insecurities of a small group of individuals, if not one individual alone. And that is something we're seeing with Putin threatening nuclear warfare. The insecurity that Ukraine's decision to adopt a democratic system was going to leave Russia in the past, and the fear that once he'd already started the war, Putin would need to defend himself with nuclear armament preemptively before NATO could make an offensive attack. So it always appears to be all about the person and their personal human emotions, which is the point being made in The Simpsons with the frog's legs remark. And this is why dictatorships are so dangerous, because we are currently seeing millions of people's lives changing due to one man's decisions. Whereas a democracy is designed to have every decision be the result of a collaborative effort, avoiding this possibility almost always quite effectively. So yes, the French president and a stubborn Springfield mayor starting a nuclear war over a petty argument is pretty accurate. But is there a nuclear war happening? No. So it's not really a prediction and more of an astute reflection of reality and the nature of war. But it is important to note that although it's scary for obvious reasons to envision this Simpsons episode actually predicting a modern reality, it just isn't. There's no nuclear war right now, but there is a war happening in Ukraine. So as hard as it is to stay positive, it's important to focus on what really is happening and try to ignore what might be tomorrow. Which leads me to one more pretty astute point made in this episode, which I'll end on. Right before the bomb hits, we see comic book guy having an internal debate over whether or not Aquaman should be getting married to a woman without gills. And as he notices the bomb about to hit, he mutters, "Oh, I've wasted my life." The point of this joke seems to be that this debate he's having is not real and is distracting him from true reality, let alone the stretch of sidewalk ahead of him. This message rings quite true and may even be predicting this moment of me writing this script and you watching this video right now. I'm not saying I know a nuclear war will not happen, but I am saying that I know it's not happening today. So in case it does, there is some free advice encoded in this Simpsons episode to take things as they come and live in the present. They're reminding us to, as much as we can, try and focus on what really is happening, and in doing so we may all be able to find a way to get out of this mess without the Simpsons having predicted yet another tragic world event.
Our favorite Springfieldian family has always seemed to have a knack for predicting the future. When you make that much television, you're bound to write something that happens in real life somewhere down the road. Art imitates life, and in turn, life imitates art. Some folks might call this predictive programming, or maybe claim that it's an insidious plot to keep us complacent in the changes happening around us. I call it a bunch of TV writers doing their best to come up with wacky scenarios every week. Potato, potato, I guess. For whatever reason, folks really jumped on the latest wave of Simpson prediction conspiracy theories, and with that, lots of wild stuff has been linked to the show. Whether you believe it all or simply think that it's a coincidence, there's no denying the appeal of looking to a popular cartoon for a potential glimpse into humanity's future. We've seen all sorts of predictions seemingly come true over the past few years, and folks are flabbergasted by the idea that the folks at Fox were ready for so long. Take the recent Kamala Harris-Lisa Simpson connection. The purple suit caused a whole lot of synapses to fire across the internet, and I don't think some folks will ever stop talking about it. And if we delve back even deeper into presidential conspiracies, what about that time the Simpsons predicted the Trump presidency? Sure, it was played for a gag, but somehow this television businessman made his way into the White House. So for all of the predictions they've made, including the apocalypse, so-called, on Inauguration Day, some are still outstanding. They can't get them all right after all, but there are a few that really do feel like they could be accomplished in the next little while, whether they're technological advances, insane political maneuvers, or wild twists of fate that will affect vast swaths of people. So let's get right into the predictions that might come true in 2022. Are we really already 3/4 through 2021? Time sure does fly when you spend all of it on the internet. Godspeed. So the first prediction I want to analyze today is from the episode titled Lisa's Wedding, where the writers quite literally take a look into their characters' futures. The Simpsons family is thrust forward a couple dozen years, and we get to see them all grown up. Marge and Homer are looking significantly older, and Bart, Lisa, and Maggie are now full-grown adults at this point. And of course, as the title suggests, Lisa is getting married, to a Brit no less. The family takes a trip to England to meet their new in-laws-to-be, and during their stay they encounter all sorts of wacky predictions concerning what the future might look like. One of the most iconic and oft-referenced things from this future London is Big Ben, the famous clock tower striking out the hours for all to hear. Back before personal timepieces were commonplace, many people had to rely on things like clock towers to even know what time it was. We've really changed things up since then, as time is more important than ever when it comes to running businesses that are reliant on international cooperation and digital platforms. With this in mind, you can turn your attention to the newly digitized Big Ben, sporting a clock face that looks like it belongs on a Casio. It does away with a lot of the analog charm and history associated with the tower, doesn't it? But it's more efficient, so why not make the jump? Then you can have everyone sync up their personal clocks to Big Ben via Wi-Fi, and nobody can be late for anything ever again unless you want to try and make an excuse that works around this newly efficient system. Of course, it's doubtful that Big Ben will ever be fully made digital. There's too much history there, too much tourism potential. However, with the way things are going right now, digital seems to be rapidly overtaking analog in all sorts of ways. More people rely on digital, centralized clocks to plan their lives, whether that means using a phone clock or the one on their laptop. Watches have largely become accessories or jewelry, unless they can be used for step counting or connecting to the internet. I haven't been in a classroom for a while, so I can't really tell you the last time I saw a proper wall clock. Billboards are opting to become enormous LCD screens to maximize the amount of ads they can display. All of this to keep things connected and seemingly integrated. So what's to say some hotshot in tech wouldn't suggest that Big Ben be brought into the age of information? As we speak, Big Ben is undergoing some renovations too. That's right, in 2017 the bells were silenced, the dials were scheduled to be reglazed, lighting was set to be upgraded, and a lift was even planned to be added. No public announcements about digitizing the display, but nothing is certain, right? And guess when this upgrade is due to be finished? 2022. There's still the possibility that Big Ben could be shaped into the form we witnessed on the Simpsons quasi-canonical foray into the future. Speaking of technology run rampant, let's move on to the next possible prediction. We've seen a lot of wonderful advances in tech over the past few decades, bringing us levels of luxury and efficiency we could previously only dream of. Of course, this kind of advancement is a double-edged sword, with every benefit bringing along some sort of damage or detriment. The more nice things we have, the more garbage we produce. The more comfortable our homes and workplaces are thanks to air conditioning and fuel-powered energy, the more damage we could do to the environment. Plenty of greener options are available for consumers and businesses alike, but the profit motive of using the cheaper, dirtier methods remains. With the way things are going, we could very well end up with a bit of an environmental disaster on our hands. It's slowly working up to Armageddon right now, with many irreversible milestones about to be reached, but that kind of slow march towards doom is easy to ignore. If someone were to, say, dump a large amount of hazardous waste into the water supply or set off some sort of reaction that burns up enormous tracts of land, then we'd have to do something. Folks have tried fighting the fires set by gender reveal parties and in the ocean, and done their best to clean up oil spills, but it's tough. Wouldn't it be easier if we just contained the disaster so the rest of the world could breathe easy? Well, The Simpsons predicted just such an event occurring and came up with an ingenious solution. Put a dome over it. You might remember this from the Simpsons movie way back when. After Homer dumps all of his pet pig's droppings into a local waterway, things get bad fast. Thus, a wonderful, benevolent government official decides that the best option is to totally quarantine that area in the most literal way possible. Dome. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened next year, to be completely honest. All it takes is one dude stockpiling crude oil in Rubbermaid containers, dumping his stash into the river. Or maybe an NFT farm will catch fire so spectacularly no one can hope to put it out. And to cap off our predictions for the day, why not go with the classic billionaire blocks out the sun bit. Stranger things have and will continue to happen. In the episode Who Shot Mr. Burns, the titular nuclear power plant owner decides that he would make a whole lot more money if no one could experience the sun's rays. To ensure that his nuclear-powered electricity was sold as a monopoly, he erects an enormous device meant to literally block out the sun, plunging Springfield into darkness. Although I don't think anybody today would be able to pull this off for political, technological, and general moral reasons, we have seen major corporations do their best to keep monopolies thriving so that customers pay out the nose for something they could otherwise get for next to nothing. Nestle diverting water, bottling it, and selling it back to people at a profit seems to be about equivalent, doesn't it? Well, going back to literally blocking out the sun, I again don't think someone will put a machine on Earth to do it. I can see this going one of two ways. Option 1, we continue to wreck the environment and produce massive amounts of waste and fumes. Eventually, smog and smoke manage to semi-permanently settle in our atmosphere, stopping the full rays of the sun from ever reaching the surface. Sounds like fun. Option 2 involves all these billionaires continuing their personal space race to the point where satellites orbiting Earth are simply too plentiful. We'll start seeing the blanket of machines from the surface, and soon enough they'll cross over the sun like clouds on an overcast day. It might not be intentional on the surface anywhere, but if this happens, a billionaire will have blocked out the sun. The future, everyone. So that just about sums up the Simpsons predictions I could see happening in the far-off year of 2022. History seems to be moving faster than ever these days, although I think that does have something to do with the fact that we're always chronicling everything from every conceivable angle. Wild how that works, right?